So we have to talk wide receivers. I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had with Malik Neighbors versus Marvin Harrison at the top of this draft. But you have Brian Thomas Jr., the other LSU receiver, above Marvin Harrison Jr. And as much as I
Go ahead, say it. You think it's crazy. You think it's crazy.
I love divergent opinions and out there individual takes. But this feels crazy. Justify this to me.
Well, listen, Brian Thomas, sure, there's a little bit of a projection involved there, right? I could be a little bit like you talked about with the quarterbacks where I'm a sucker for the strong arm guy and all that, right? I don't let it go so far out of the way where I'm just like, well, I think Anthony Richardson's better than C.J. Stroud because his arm's better, right?
Right.
But, like to that point, yeah, I fall in love with explosiveness, speed, the specimen of the guy maybe a little bit more, right, than some of the guys out there. I want to make this clear. I really like Marvin Harrison Jr., right? I think he's one of the safer picks in the draft. I know that for sure, right? But with Malik Neighbors, I'm blown away by Malik Neighbors. I think he's pretty damn special. I do. I just look at route running, explosiveness, what he does after the catch, right? Even though he's not as big as Marvin Harrison, he is good at catching balls in traffic and 50-50 balls and jumping up and getting it that way, right? But I think it's really more of Brian Thomas's top-end talent and his playmaking ability and ability to separate as compared to Marvin Harrison, where he runs good routes, but I'm not wow. He knows how to attack coverage and leverage, but I'm not oh, wow, the physical specimen is just going to pull away from, I think, top-tier corners all the time on a regular basis. And I guess I value that maybe a little bit more than you or some others out there. And again, I'm not saying I'm right. But, Brian Thomas Jr., I looked at Sam in a lot of ways and went, man, I feel like I'm watching an A.J. Brownish type of guy. It's not an extensive route tree, a lot like A.J. Brown at Ole Miss and all that. You don't get to see it all. But, man, I just really like the physical tools I thought that he brought to the table.
The Brian Thomas one is interesting because he's the receiver this year where certainly I and Steve, to a slightly lesser degree, are lower on him than the consensus. Now, you're higher on him than the consensus, but he's sort of consensus wide receiver 4 right now, I think, for most people. We have him much lower. To me, he feels a lot more limited, I think, than you're describing. And I kind of comped him to this Marquez Valdez-Scantling type of receiver at a time when the league is almost moving away from those guys because of all this too high coverage shell and the sort of taking away of explosives by defense. And I'm wondering how much more he can do against NFL defenses.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Now, listen, he's a lot bigger than Marquez Valdez-Scantling, right? I think what he does after the catch is kind of special that way, let alone hey, I'm big on let's first start it out where let's just line you up here and let's see if you can get open against people all day long, right? And that to me is where he shines. Now, he doesn't run a ton of routes, but damn, he runs by everybody, right? That's the thing I love. And then listen, I know the route running and we didn't, but this is where, again, my evaluation, trying to piece things together, right? I look at it and go, I think he's got the tools to be a good route runner, right? And every bit as good or maybe even better than Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm not super impressed with Marvin Harrison Jr.'s ability to just stick a foot in the ground and explode out of that break and pull away from people. To me, Brian Thomas was better in that areas. Now, does he know to attack leverage? Is he quite as nuanced as Marvin Harrison Jr.? No. And that's where Marvin Harrison Jr. is really good. But I almost feel more comfortable with Marvin Harrison Jr. almost as a big slot rather than, oh, wait, I'm going to put him out here and I know he'll get open against the number one corners in football week after week after week. That's where I'm just not sure. And that's where I think I'm probably a little lower on Marvin Harrison than most, to your point, Sam.
When you turned on Marvin Harrison's tape, did you say, I'm watching Neighbors and how explosive he is, and Brian Thomas is creating all these big plays, and Rome Odunze looks really athletic? And did you feel like Harrison, who didn't run, right? He doesn't have this 4.4 on film, which plays in your brain a little bit. It's oh, he doesn't feel fast, but I know he runs 4.4, so I'm okay. Does any of that play in where he doesn't look as explosive as some of those other guys, but he is better as far as the nuance goes, as you say?
Yeah, I try not to let, hey, he didn't run the 40 or any of that influence me and biased. I don't want to do that. I try to go by, the film and look at it that way. I think to your point, like on film, I don't know how you guys felt, but I would have probably said, yeah, he's a high 4.4 if I had to evaluate it from the way he plays, right? 4.48, 4.47, something along those lines there. And, that's where, yes, I did not love his game in that way. But, like, do I think he's got incredible hands? He's got size, right? He knows how to play the ball, adjust to the ball, catch the ball in traffic, right? Tough over the middle. Yes, he can do all of that, right? So that's where I think I'm a little different, is where I almost look at him as like a Michael Thomas, right? Almost that kind of ish player, rather than wait, he's just going to go outside and be Justin Jefferson or A.J. Brown or Tyreek Hill, and we can just go gadget speed and I'll get open all day long. And that's where I think I just differ on that, is where I kind of look at him in that way. I think Brian Thomas Jr. has a chance, or in my eyes, is going to be that guy you can put on the outside and go, whoa, he caught a slant, he ran for 50 and a touchdown. Whoa, he caught a slant, he broke a tackle and got another 20 yards pulling away from people. And that's where he excites me. I think that's an element that Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't have. But I know it's nitpicky, it's close, and I do want to make sure I like Marvin Harrison Jr. I really do.
Do you think that him or his sort of representation actually made a mistake with that whole, we're not going to work out, we're not going to put the numbers out there? Because that makes sense. The narrative is sort of, nobody has questions about that, so Marvin Harrison doesn't need to work out, right? Everyone right. Has what they already want on the tape. But all of a sudden, it is being compared to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., and those guys have the numbers there. And now we are sort of saying, does Marvin Harrison actually have that? Whereas, some tracking data says that he's got blazing speed. Like, if he'd actually gone out there and run a 4.4 flat, half of this goes away. Not necessarily from you, but from a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would have, eased the pain of some people, right? That are like, oh, I'm just not sure how explosive it is, right? I think that would have gone a long way. But I also understand, like, his take on that. Wait, I'm the number one guy. Right. Everybody thinks I'm the number one guy. And when you are that guy, right, a lot of the times you feel like no matter what you do, it's not going to be good enough and people are going to kind of pick it apart and maybe drop you. So I don't fault him for his decision. But, yeah, he's gotten stuck in a little position where, yeah, people like me, like Brian Thomas Jr., like you're saying, I think the NFL looks at Brian Thomas Jr. and maybe views him a little higher than all the draft pundits out there and all that, right? And I mean, I think you guys know and I know as well, and I know, I don't know everybody in football, but there's definitely a handful of teams that have a for sure better grade on Malik Neighbors than Marvin Harrison Jr., and we'll see where that goes. To me, the Arizona team is going to be the interesting one, right? Because they need something. They got to make sure, and like we said, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a safe pick. Monty Ossenfort's from New England. They usually like big receivers. I certainly could see him going there and them feeling comfortable with that, which I would like, because then maybe my Giants will take Neighbors at 6. But, yeah, it's going to be an interesting little discussion and see how this works out for the draft.
Let's talk corners a little bit. You have who do you like at the top, and then you have at least one different name. Like your top 5, again, looks different than others as far as corner goes.
Well, I have a man crush on Quinyon Mitchell, right? I love him. I think he is, for my money, in the conversation for the best player in the draft, right? I think every bit up there with Dallas Turner of the world, where, Dallas Turner's awesome, but I think he's also a little bit of a projection specimen, like what we're talking about too. With Quinyon Mitchell, I think the only thing you talk about is just like, oh, I wish he would have played some higher end receivers this last year so I could evaluate on that on film. But, man, explosive, aggressive, top-end speed, size to, bump with big receivers down the field. And I thought his ability to play the ball, right, because I think he's got a receiver background a little bit. You see that. He's not one of those guys, Sam, how, like, they always play the receiver and then just try to knock it out of their hands instead of looking back at the ball. He, like, looks at the ball and tries to make a play on it like a receiver. And I found that to be refreshing and awesome. And, gave me shades of Devin Witherspoon from last year, except I think he's better pure cover guy, maybe not quite the kamikaze tackler, but still good in that department.